Good morning, Sunday, May 16th, 2021. Uh, Welcome to Meditation 102. As we do every week, we set our intention and make aspirations by saying the four immeasurables prayer. May all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings not be separated from the happiness that has never known suffering. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment, anger, and aversion. Nick, could you keep that up for 1 minute, that prayer? Just, we say this every week, but if you see, these four immeasurables correspond to four qualities. Love. So when you make the aspiration that all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness, you're cultivating love, right? Compassion. May all beings free from suffering, the causes of suffering. And you have compassion for beings that are suffering, and you have love. The love that you cultivate makes aspirations that all beings are happiness. Joy, you're wishing or making aspirations that all beings have joy, so they're not separated from the happiness that has never known suffering. And equanimity, which is actually very important in Dharma practice. And in some ways, at least from my perspective, is related to the concept of interdependence, interconnectedness, and ultimately non-duality. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment, anger, and aversion. So, those of you who are new, we're not doing a review today of technique. So hopefully you go to IGTV, my IGTV, and there's the 101 videos. I think there's 7 of them. They all have the basic technique. It's very easy to learn. Today we're just going to sit in the beginning of class for 9 minutes. Actually, let's do 11 minutes today. The tanka behind me is the 1,000-armed Chenrezig, which is the Buddha of compassion. And the 1,000 arms illustrate the many compassionate Buddha activities that is capable of, right? Just if you were curious, that's what that is. Sagadawa is a period of time that's a holy several weeks in Buddhism, culminating May 26th, which is the day of Sagadawa. Sagadawa celebrates Buddha's enlightenment. So this is a good time to practice, it's a good time to meditate. If you're into Dharma, it's a good time to practice Dharma and study Dharma. With that in mind, let's practice. Let's sit and meditate for 11 minutes. I also wanted to bring up, if those of you who were here last week, we had Lama Surya Das, which was, I thought, a very inspiring, beautiful teaching. And he brought a lot of joy to the practice, I thought. He guided us in a meditation practice. We'll put that up on IGTV in the coming, weeks, so you can access it and watch it again. Or if you didn't get to see it, you can watch it, because it was really inspiring, and he just brought a lot of passion and joy and beauty to the practice, in a very straightforward and simple way that I really connected to, and I think a lot of you did as well. I've heard from some of you. I think sometimes when we're beginning to learn something, to try something new, like meditation, so a lot of us have not done this before and are new to it, we get caught up in, are we doing it right? Are we doing it wrong? It's hard. I don't want to do it. It's a struggle. I'm having so many thoughts and I can't get past the thoughts and all, and sometimes it's good to just let go of all that, and really just let yourself kind of settle into that peace, that great natural peace that Lama Surya Das was talking about, and a lot of the masters talk about all the time, because it's there, and they say that our Buddha nature is ultimately who we are. So that peace, that natural great peace, is there. The most trusting it, that when we do settle, when we make the effort to meditate, when we sit in the posture and we begin the practice, that we can connect to that. Let's keep that in mind a little bit. I mean, I may speak a little, I may not. I don't have the skills, obviously, of someone like him who can inspire and take us through the practice in that way, because that was pretty amazing. And I would encourage those of you who are inspired by his teaching to really look into his teachings. And he has a website and he has an Instagram, and he's constantly doing teachings online. And I'm sure very soon, as things open up, you'll be able to do retreats and classes with Lama Surya Das and lots of the great masters, which is very encouraging. Okay, I'm going to close this door because it's noisy, but we can start right now. Go ahead. Remember, we try to use our breath as the anchor to this practice, at least at this stage of the game. That's what we're doing. So we focus our awareness. We're focusing our mind on the breath. We talk about the gaze, Tibetan tradition is eyes open. And resting the gaze on whatever's in front of it, not spacing out, unfocused, not intensely staring, locked, with our vision into watching this object, but just resting our gaze on whatever is in front of us. And you can use that vibe, that energy with the mind too. So we're focused on the breath, but it's not like I have to focus on the breath. I gotta focus, it's really just resting that attention almost, if that makes sense. Lightly putting the attention on the breath, easing our attention toward the breath. At the same time, we're becoming aware of what our mind is doing. So when our mind gets lost in thought, which it will, we're going to start thinking. That's what the mind does. We use the technique of going back to the breath. We also use the technique of imagining the thought arising in the sky like a cloud. And when we become aware of that, we imagine it disintegrating back into the sky from which it came. In the same way, the thought arises from the mind. And the thought also dissolves back into the mind, much like a wave that arises from the ocean and settles back into the ocean. So with that in mind, you don't really separate a wave from the ocean. You don't really separate a cloud from the sky, because it goes back into the sky. In the same way, a thought arises from the mind. And in the words of my teacher, Garchen Rinpoche, Buddha is not the name of a man, it's the name of your mind. So remember, when you're looking at your thought, when you're becoming aware of the fact that you're thinking, it's your mind looking at your mind. It's that Buddha mind looking at your mind. That's what we're trying to settle into. Speaking just personally from my own experience, in the moments when I do become aware that I'm thinking, and I'm able to either go back to the breath or let it dissipate or become aware of my mind looking at those thoughts, I experience a calm and a settling and a peace. And, you know, you do this over and over again, you trust that that is there. And if it's there for real, then it's always accessible, not just on the cushion, not just at 10 o'clock on Sundays during practice, but on the subway, on a crowded street, online at the bank, or online in the supermarket, or online, at the motor vehicle, so driving down the highway or in a crowded street. Back to the breath. those of you who have been doing this for a while, you can just try settling into that natural great peace, as Lama Surya Das was talking about it. Just know that it's there, and just see if you could just settle into it and sit in it. And when the thoughts come back, either apply the breath back to the breath technique, or just become aware of it, and again, relax into the natural great peace. Settle into it. Using your awareness of the fact that you're thinking to remind you to go back into that place. So it's using the mind, looking at mind, reminding you to go back into the mind and settle into it. I mean, it's a difficult thing for me to articulate, because I'm not very adept at speaking about it. But if you've been doing this for a bit, and some of you have been doing it for quite a while now, since the summer or fall regularly, you may get what I'm saying, even if it's just for a second or a couple of seconds. It's a good glimpse. I'm going to read something. So, building off of last week's class, I've been reading this book. Nick, if you have it, it's a book by Nyosho Khenpo Rinpoche, who was one of the masters that Lama Surya Das studied with. And he collaborated on a book called I think it's called Natural Great Perfection. There it is, by Nyosho Khenpo, translated by Lama Surya Das. That is a picture of Nyosho Khenpo Rinpoche. I would encourage you all, I mean, if you were inspired by last week's class, or just by this class in general, what we're studying here, I would encourage you to get this book. It's really, really interesting. He passed away a number of years ago, but he was a fascinating Lama and really brilliant. And it's very accessible, which I like. And gives some, it's written by him, and he gives a little bit of biographical information, his escape from Tibet in 1959, and his experiences living in India as a refugee and living on the streets and being homeless. And then it goes into his, basic Buddhadharma, and into some more advanced, teachings, Dzogchen teachings like Lama Surya Das was giving. It's really, really good. I would encourage you all to get it and read it if you have been inspired by, especially by Lama Surya Das last week. I'm going to read something from him. Where is it? Here it is, which I found particularly inspiring. To work on the mind is a very vast subject. In fact, it is the subject of the entire Buddhadharma. I mean, that we can't underestimate it or take that for granted, what that says. To work on the mind is really the subject of the entire Buddhadharma. That's what Buddhism is. It's why I like Buddhism, why I gravitated towards it, because it's about working with your own mind. It's not really about adopting a certain set of beliefs or rules or things. Obviously, there are, ethical practices and behaviors that are encouraged, but it's really because they facilitate the working with the mind and karma and all these things. In essence, the main reason the mind generates its confusing passions and intense emotions is the strong clinging to I, me, and mine, I, me, and mine. Because of that clinging, we suffer when we do not obtain all that the I wants, and we suffer by experiencing what the I does not want. It is through meditating over and over again on the illusory and insubstantial nature of mind, ego, of self, that we slowly can dissolve ego clinging. Among all the methods to achieve this result, the deepest one is the meditation on bodhicitta, unselfish love and compassion, to be full of love for all sentient beings and to consider others more important than ourselves is the very root of Dharma, combining wisdom and compassion. And we've talked about the view, cultivating a much wider view than we have been used to in our lives. And the Buddhist view is one of interdependence, interconnectedness, impermanence as well, but ultimate reality being about non-dualism, that there is no separation between self and other, right? That an ultimate nature is that we are all connected. So when we start to turn our minds in that direction, the clinging to the I, like Rinpoche says here, will dissipate a bit and make more space in our minds, make it easier to work with our mind. If we have any questions, we can. What books or texts do you use to comfort yourself in times of uncertainty or anxiety? I can't say I go to a book or text in times of uncertainty or anxiety, but I definitely try to practice. I go to books that are written by the lamas that I talk about all the time, like Garchen Rinpoche, Joko Khyentse Rinpoche, Dudjom Rinpoche, Nyosho Khenpo Rinpoche, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, Lama Yeshe Rinpoche. But I do think that practice, Dharma practice, can help in times of uncertainty and when I'm anxious. I'm not talking about clinical anxiety where people, are, possessed and really having trouble living their lives because of it. That's a different level of anxiety that I think, you need some help with, professionally, sometimes, maybe even medically sometimes, Before I was a Buddhist, right, I was exploring a lot of different spiritual paths. Why Buddhism stuck is because there was a really clear practice, among other reasons. But I would read a book and it would make a lot of sense. Other kind of spiritual practice, and the book would be over, and then I'd be back to my own devices and unsatisfaction or sufferings or all those things. But I remember I was going through something really kind of horrible happened. At least at the time, I saw it as such in my life, and I was having a really hard time dealing with it. And there was a friend of mine who was kind of a spiritual teacher in some ways. I'm not going to go into detail of what. Not a Buddhist, but she gave me the number of a Tibetan Buddhist Rinpoche, who I don't remember who he was. This is before I really knew anything about Buddhism. And she said, well, maybe you can call him. I think he was living in North Carolina or something like that, but he was a Tibetan Rinpoche. And I called him and I kind of explained what was going on. He said, I can't do anything about your situation, but you could, by remembering that everything changes. And what's going on now seems very difficult and insurmountable, but at some point it won't be. At the time, that wasn't, I wanted a solution to the problem. And at the time, It wasn't exactly what I wanted to hear, but I did listen to it. I did hear it, and it went in some way. But in hindsight, looking at it, it really made a great deal of sense, because that problem, or whatever it was at the time, actually not that long after I made that call, really wasn't much of a problem anymore. It just kind of faded away, as do a lot of things, and what I'm getting at is the part of the view, as we speak of, is impermanence. Everything does change all the time. When I am going through times of uncertainty or anxiety, I do remember that. That is everything is impermanent, including us. Um, so uncertainty and impermanence are kind of the same thing, but just knowing that everything's uncertain, really. Um, everything's impermanent. Now, despite that, we have to go on and find a way. But I just find comfort in the teachings in general and in the practice. So I'm not recommending a book, but I am recommending practice and the teachings in general. I find having subtle atmospheric meditative music in the background during these sessions is helpful. I don't know. I don't use music or sound for meditation, and that's not how I was taught. So, I mean, if you find it helpful that it helps you meditate, I guess it's fine. I mean, I don't know. I just don't, it's not something that I have experience with. How to curb an addiction psychologically. I think, addiction is a very dangerous, destructive, difficult thing to deal with. I encourage people to get professional help, therapy, counseling, 12-step, with people who have experience with addiction. I think Buddhadharma meditation can be a tool, a component that can help, but I would, I think the difficulty with addiction really needs to be addressed professionally, because it's it's disease. Um, and it can take quite a while to get a handle on addiction. The 12th step, when you talk about the 12 steps that AA uses, or NA, Narcotics Anonymous, and there's many A programs, dealing with the various addictions like food and sex and gambling and lots of different things. The 12th step is being of service. So, which I think is great, So the last step is that you have to help others. 12-step programs can be very helpful for addiction. And now, since there's been quarantine, there's 12-step meetings online and Zoom and all that stuff. You don't have to actually go places for it. But the first line of attack for addiction, I think, should be professional help and 12-step. That's my opinion. Dharma, can you talk about that a bit? Dharma is teachings, So the three jewels is the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and the Buddha is the teacher, and the Dharma is the teachings, and the Sangha is the community, a congregation of Buddhists. How do you personally practice working on vastness of the mind, separating the I from the ego? I think, personally, there's a lot of teachings about what the self is, and the Buddhists really believe that the self is really an illusion. It's a way that we perceive what we are. That's conditioned through karma. That's conditioned through the way we've, existed. But it's actually a very limited point of view and a deluded point of view. Our ultimate nature, right, is Buddha nature, as we've been told by the teachers, you know. That's why the Buddha was able to achieve enlightenment. If the Buddha was a man, right? Human being. If he did not have Buddha nature, he would not have been able to be enlightened. And the same with us. We are able to be enlightened. We're able to transcend this limited human, what we've been limited to as human beings, point of view, way of thinking, way of perceiving the world, way of perceiving who we are, because we do have Buddha nature. Personally practice working on the vastness of mind. I mean, that's when we meditate, when the mind does settle, you know, a lot of times they use that image of like a glass of, when you get a glass of water from like a stream, it's muddy, right? And then when you leave it on the table and it settles, the sediment goes to the bottom. It's very similar to the way thoughts work. When you get into the posture and you get into the breath, the thoughts begin to settle. It's very different than our normal, okay, I wake up in the morning and I got to rush because I got to go to work and I got to brush my teeth and I got to, you know, you're full of thoughts. Is my car, it was broken yesterday, is it fixed? Do I have to, I have that meeting, I want to, you know, a million thoughts. All right, so we sit, we get into the posture, we get into the breath, we start to become aware of the breath, and those thoughts start to settle. And when they do settle, that you know, that vastness really appears, because when we're not caught up in that millisecond of thought, millisecond over millisecond over millisecond of thought, when we're not caught up in that, we do have that experience of the vastness of mind. And meditation really is about habituating ourselves to experiencing that. And that vastness is very different than the little puny ego that's constantly needs this and needs that and defends that and, you know, wants that at your expense and is offended at that because you ignored me today. You know, the ego is constantly in that little battle of protecting itself and inflating itself and aggrandizing itself. You know, think about the people that have shown you the most love in your life, genuine love. And think about a moment when they really illustrated that love to you. And think about the energy that came from them in that moment. And I would guess you'd probably experience that as that, whatever that energy was coming from them, as having very little ego and much more this wide expanse of love, you know, love being more this wide expanse of quality. How do I work on separating the I from ego is a really good question, but part of it is becoming aware of the fact that I operate out of a place from ego, and then trying to make a decision not to, you know, and try to come from a place of love, you know, when I can, you know, or at least not harm or not, you know, not anger. That's a really good question. It's basically the whole, you know, it's exactly what the teaching we read from Nyosho Kempo Rinpoche. Search for the self, you know, what is the self? Is the self just this body? Is it this thought that I had that I woke up this morning, I needed to brush my teeth? Search for it. You'll start to see that it's very difficult to kind of put your finger on what is the I and what is the self, you know? Is it the cells in our body? Is it the organs? Is it the brain? Is it the thought? Because if it is the brain, then you have to look at what is the brain. Well, the brain is a bunch of tissue that's made up of cells, that's made up of atoms, that's made up of smaller neutrinos or whatever the smallest, quarks, subquarks, and those things they say are not even necessarily a particle anymore. They become waves. So what is that the self? For a beginner, what meditation practice would you recommend and how frequently? I would recommend what we do here, which is calm abiding meditation, which is go to the 101 videos, and that teaches you that technique. How frequently? Every day. That's always best. I took the subway for the first time in months. I was alone in the train, and the lights kept flashing on and off. Rationally, I knew there was no reason for fear, yet I was afraid. Can you recommend practices to deal with the mind in moments like that? Mm. I'm not really sure. I mean, the big one is knowing that there's no real death, right? That's easy to say, but when we are threatened with situations that are life-threatening, it's very difficult not to feel fear. I mean, although your life wasn't necessarily threatened there, but there was something that was triggering a fear and a panic there, which is, that's how we operate. Um, I mean, you could just practice meditation in those moments and really try to connect to the breath and try to, use that fear as just a thought. There are certain things. Look, there could have been someone who was very aggressive and very, scary coming on the train, and you had maybe a reason or had a weapon and you had a reason to be afraid. And then you have to kind of figure out how you're going to deal with that. And should you get out of the car, or do you need to defend yourself or defend someone else? Those things are very real and happen in life. And the more clear we can be about those situations, the better, rather than just reacting out of fear and anger, but just trying to have some kind of clarity. But in this situation, that wasn't the case. It wasn't an imminent threat per se. And something like that is good to check in, meditate, try to clear the mind, go to the breath, think of that fear as a cloud and dissipating. I mean, if really you believe in reincarnation and things like that, you just know that it's karma for you to be in the car at that time, and that the lights are flashing in that moment, and um, just accepting where you are in the moment. Would you ever want to become a teacher of Buddhism someday, to be able to pass on what you've learned to someone else like you were helped? Well, there's great teachers of Buddhism. Certainly, there's an embarrassment of riches when it comes to that, as they say. So, you know, I think there's plenty of teachers, that can do this. Okay. Let's sit for 7 minutes. And regarding that last question about teachers, I'm a fellow student, who was leading like a study group. That's basically what this is. So a lot of you are new, but that doesn't matter. But we're all students here. And I can only speak to what I've been taught and what I retain, or have absorbed from those teachers, which is very limited in a lot of ways. But it has been good that we've gotten together and practiced, and we've had other teachers who have taught us, who have come to this class, and we read from great masters and talk about those things. In that, I think it's very valuable. But for those who are really inspired by these teachings, and want to go further, look to the masters, look to the great teachers. I post them all the time on my stories on Instagram. I talk about them in class. Really, I think it's great to find a teacher. Some of the students in this class have taken refuge with teachers and become Buddhists, and I encourage that if you're interested, if your interest has really grown, you know. Okay, 7 minutes. Okay, great. I want to thank our noble producer Nick Solidio for his kindness in making this possible. Thank you all for coming today. Let's close with dedication of merit. By this merit, may all beings attain the state of enlightenment and conquer the enemies of faults and delusions. May they be liberated from this ocean of samsara and its pounding waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. Thank you for coming this morning. It's always great to practice with you, and we'll see you next week.